Hello and welcome to Landlord Voice, the podcast of the Scottish Association of Landlords, where we bring to you all the latest news and views of what's happening in Scotland's private rented sector. My name's John Blackwood. I'm the Chief Executive of the Scottish Association of Landlords, and as always, as co-host, I am joined by Alan Grant, who's our public relations guy, and it's always delighted to have Alan on the podcast too.
Well, thanks, John. Great to be back with you in our Glasgow studio. As ever, a packed show ahead. We've got the party conferences to look at, particularly what they mean for landlords within the context of the upcoming Holyrood election. And you've also got the latest in our series of expert interviews. So, John, who are we going to be talking to today, and what are we going to be talking to them about?
Well, Alan, today we're delighted to welcome Doug Hall from 3MC Mortgages, who operates our SAL mortgages. And at this time, it's really important for landlords to focus on property finance, all things to do with property mortgages and the buy-to-let sector. So we're going to have a good discussion about what's the sector like today and where are the good deals and how can we access them. But before we do that, what's happening in the world of politics?
Well, it's never boring, is it? There's always something going on, and it's been a particularly dramatic time as of late. We've had a budget deal reached between the Scottish Liberal Democrats and the SNP Scottish Government, made while the Tories and Labour were very much out of the room. And as if that wasn't exciting enough, Scottish Labour leader Alan Sarwar has launched a full-on attack on the leadership of Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So you're going to have a situation where Mr. Sarwar is going to be campaigning alongside Mr. Starmer, despite the former thinking that the latter shouldn't be in the role that he's in. As they say, it's a funny old game.
And you would almost imagine there's an election looming as well.
Well, indeed, and with that in mind, it's all ramping up just now, especially for the main parties who are either having or have had their the party conferences, where we usually get a feel at these events for kind of what they're going to be kind of focusing on, what their priorities are going to be. Now, for those that aren't full-on political geeks, the party conferences aren't just a chance for like the membership to get together and sort of beat the drum for their cause. There's also a chance to engage with stakeholders, with lobbyists, campaigners, and kind of people from other sectors who show up at these events. So, in fact, John, you were at the Scottish Tory conference at Murrayfield in Edinburgh. I'm sure you know the way to Murrayfield by now, given how often Sal have been there. So, how was Scottish Tory conference? What was your impression of it?
Yeah, well, of course, right at the end of February, we had two party conferences on the same weekend. And I attended Scottish Conservatives conference, and it was very interesting. I was delighted to be invited to speak at one of their keynote sessions. And of course, I was very much focusing on the private rented sector, what the party should be doing for private landlords and encouraging investment in the private rented sector, which is key. And that was chaired by Megan Gallagher, the spokesman on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives for housing. So we had a very good session, and I was joined by the Scottish Property Federation and Homes for Scotland. And very much the focus was about building new homes and the need for investment in the sector. And of course, importantly, we need more affordable homes and affordable social housing. And the Scottish Conservatives are keen to champion that cause as well too. So very much the message was Scottish Conservatives want to have more house building, they want to encourage investment in Scotland, and they want to see more homes obviously being built, and also see a positive future for private landlords operating within the sector. So we did a good discussion about all of those subjects, and I found that really interesting. And of course, as with all party conferences, as you know, they're very much about gearing up their delegates, their candidates to go out there and win an election. So it was a very interesting conference. You were same weekend at the Scottish Liberal Democrats conference. How was that? How did that go?
Well, the feeling at Scottish Liberal Dem conference at Dynamic Earth in Edinburgh, just next to Holyrood, was one of confidence. The Lib Dems are going into this election with their tails up. There's a feeling of almost having come in from the wilderness, as it were, looking at being, returning double-digit MSPs in the next Parliament potentially, getting a larger Lib Dem presence in there, so they're very positive and optimistic. Not tremendous amount of a focus on housing at the moment. I'm sure that'll come out in the upcoming manifesto. They were much more talking about sort of small businesses and care and various other kind of core Lib Dem topics for the time being. But interesting. It's going to be curious to see how that kind of rabble-rousing speech from Alico Hamilton and later from Ed Davey informs the rest of their campaign and see where they're going to go. But again, in terms of for landlords, I think it's very much a case of watch this space. Their main focus, their sort of housing suggestion was for increasing the availability, let's say, of housing for essential workers, care workers, key workers, that kind of thing. And so we'll see what more comes in the pipe from the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
So it's certainly been true over the last few months. We've been feeling that momentum building within Parliament as we've been talking in these podcasts, as well as literally out there in the constituencies, from delegates, from members of all of the respective political parties who are gearing up for election seasons. So much more to talk about that in the future. And we will return to that, of course, on this podcast with regards to what all the political parties are saying about private renting in Scotland. So that's another discussion for another podcast, and we'll come back to that in due course.
You can certainly hear the drums starting to beat in the distance, politically anyway.
Definitely. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Duke Hall to this podcast, focusing on everything to do with property finance. So welcome, Duke. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. We've been talking about politics here in Scotland. Politics in UK, of course, is perhaps a bit more exciting than what's happening here in Scotland of late.
Yes.
Exactly. We don't need to get into that, but, it's an ever-changing scene. But what about the world of finance and property finance? You know as well as I do, Duke, that private landlords in particular are always looking for the best deals. And we want to obviously make sure that there's good finance options for landlords out there, in particular here in Scotland. But before we get into all the detail, how do you really feel the climate is for investment in the private rented sector in Scotland, Duke? Is this a good time for landlords to be investing?
Yeah, I think it is, John. Firstly, thanks for inviting me on. Really appreciate it. I think from a finance perspective, it absolutely is, a good time to be investing. We have faced a number of headwinds, and we've got a few more headwinds to face, but there's also been some tailwinds. And if we look at, purely from a finance point of view, if we look at the tailwinds around interest cover ratios and gross yields and how those have changed over the last few years, we've started to see some real sort of good positivity in there. Plus, we've also seen the buy-to-let market feels more stable than it has ever done so for the last probably 12 months, when it comes to the finance piece. And if I talk about the ICRs are really interesting, the interest cover ratios. And the interest cover ratio, in simple terms, this is a really important calculation for landlords when they are taking finance. And it's basically you take your gross rental income, you can either do it monthly or annually, you divide it by your finance costs, multiply it by 100, and then that then gives you your percentage. So if we look at, if we go back to, and I use UK finance figures, and UK finance is an association, a lenders association, with about 300 different members in the UK. They sort of produce reports, one on an annual basis, but they also do like a buy-to-let quarterly review on the market and how it's progressing through its time. If we go back to the last 3 months of 2023, the interest cover ratio for lending done within that quarter, so just bear that in mind. So for lending done in that quarter, across the UK, it was 180%. In Scotland, it was 201%. So that's going back to the last quarter of 2023. It's been improving every quarter, each quarter on. And the most recent report they produced was, and it's historical, so it was back to Q3 2025. And at that point, across the UK, the average ICR had gone from 180 up to 215%. And in Scotland, it's at 247%. And that's the highest of all the UK nations. So we see that that's encouraging as a reasonable tailwind. The other side to that is if we look at gross yields on property, the most recent data for lending again in that quarter, so Q3 2025, that across the UK, the average was 7.15%, and in Scotland, it was 8.5%. So those two metrics are influenced by rent catching up and finance costs reducing over that period of time. So, yes, in answer to your question, I believe it is. I think as landlords, I'm a landlord myself. As landlords, we understand that, it's not a short game anymore, and there is opportunities both for sort of yield growth and also appreciation, capital appreciation growth as well, John.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, and every time we have a chat and you attend our annual conference, and you're always very upbeat about the sector in the sense of opportunities there for landlords to invest. And I think certainly with our podcasts, we can often focus on changes in legislation and barriers for landlords to not only get into the sector, but continue to invest in the sector. And I think it's quite reassuring to hear that actually, when it comes to the finance sector, when it comes to buy to let, actually it's quite positive. And are we seeing new people coming into the sector, Duke, or is this remortgaging, or is that a combination of
Yeah.
both?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because if you look across the UK, basically the buy-to-let from a UK finance figures, and just bear in mind, UK finance figures excludes product transfers, and a product transfer is where a landlord stays with their existing lender but moves on to a new property. But moves on to a new product. What we are seeing is, one, we're seeing some new lenders coming into the market, which is great. Competition's great. We're also seeing some lenders come into like the specialist arena. So last year, BM Solutions and Godiva, they both entered the limited company lending market, which what that creates is competition. And if it creates competition, it creates a better outcomes for landlords. So it's quite interesting how the market sort of moved, and it's become, as I say, it's become a little bit more stable in how it's sort of progressed, because we're not seeing the volatility around the swap rates, and swap rates are what lenders use to price their fixed rate products. So, and they're sort of like the product of choice by most sort of landlords is a fixed rate product.
Mhm. And I remember from previous conversations we've had, you've mentioned that, of course, there are many more buy-to-let products on the market now than ever before. And as you've just alluded to, it's a very competitive market. So everybody's out there looking for that business, and that's good news for landlords to be able to get the best possible products there. And you're mentioning there about, obviously, landlords that might have properties owned in limited companies. One of the drawbacks from that was, of course, you pay more in your mortgage costs, don't you? And there were fewer providers out there willing to lend to those types of landlords. But it's interesting how you're seeing that market's changing and to the good.
It is, John. And you're also seeing as well, there is perceived to be and I won't say a more of an element of risk from a lender's perspective, but you're finding more lenders moving into that limited company space because they can charge maybe a little bit more of a margin over their call rate. But what you find is you have mainstream lenders that have come into that space, and then you've got specialist lenders. And with the specialist lenders, by the way, you tend to find if you're applying as an individual or as a limited company, the actual rate's the same. So it just depends on which lender you're looking at with your mortgage advisor to then see what the best option is. But we're seeing some sort of commonality there in the pricing within the specialist lending sectors.
Mm. So if you were to crystal ball gaze at the moment, then, Doug, where do you think the market's going to go with regards to mortgage finance? Where do you think we could be in a year, 2 years' time?
Yeah, I think, well, if we look at bank base rate, you know, market predictions at the moment are for 2 further drops this year, which will probably end up sort of round about 3.25. You then see in the sort of the midterm, again, the markets are suggesting that bank base rate will probably be round about or level out round about 3.5%. What one of the key triggers is, and John, I've alluded to it at your annual conference for the last few years, shall we say, we talk about swap rates, and swap rates is the mechanism that lenders use to price their fixed rate products. And it's basically the market's average view of where the interest rate will be over a swap period of time. So like a 1, 2, 3 or 5 years. And at the conference, 2023, the 5-year swap rate was 4.44. 2024, it was 4%. 2025, it was 3.65. And I had a quick look this morning, and we're hovering around about 3.55 at the moment. So there's some reasonable pricing to be had. One of the things that worries me slightly, and when I say worries me, it worries everybody who's got this type of deal, but those landlords that took a 2-year deal back in 23, 24 should get a reasonably nice surprise when they come to relook at the pricing for their next product, because the market was slightly higher then. Where there's a bit of a challenge is those landlords who took a 5-year deal back out in 2021 that have got maturities coming through in 2026, So because the pricing will be higher than where they were. So you might find some of those landlords, we've seen a lot of landlords sort of drop anchor and just sort of secure a 2-year deal. I mean, last year, 30% of all the business we advised our clients on was actually for a product transfer. So that was staying with their existing lender. So but the competition's there. And one of the firms I reference is a firm called Moneyfacts. And Moneyfacts, they're great from a product analysis data. They highlighted in January of this year that there's about 5,000 different buy-to-let products available. And just to put that into context, if we go back to the debacle around the Liz Truss back in September 22, those products actually dropped down to just below 1,000. So we've gone from 1,000 as one trough, if you want to call it, and we're up to 5,000. And within those 5,000, there's a good selection of both 2 and 5 years for landlords at the moment. And, it's important that when they speak with their mortgage advisor, they share their plans on what their plans are around the property to then see what the most suitable product is for them.
So as you mentioned, some landlords, I'm one of them, coming to that stage where I did do a 2-year product a couple of years ago, coming to the end of that. And, haven't started yet, but that will be my process this year, looking at the market. I'm interested in what you say about perhaps there should be good news there for us if we're looking to the market. So that's something to hold on to. But you're right, over the last few years, in 2022, we had 8 rate increases in interest rates, and in 2023 it was 5, and then from 2024 we've seen steady decreases, which we hope would continue. Do you think it's going to plateau at some point, or where do you think we're going to end up there?
Yeah, I think it will, John. I think it will. This is obviously a bit of a $6 million question, shall we say? But it's, I do believe we will see a couple of further drops this year. But I also think we will then start to maybe level out and maybe go back a little bit up to about 3.5%. But the thing with the bank base rate is, when it comes to the pricing of products and fixed rate money, whilst bank base rate can influence it, it's not the only thing that influences the rate changes. It's the overall market stability and what's going on from an economy point of view that actually influences what the swap rates are, which is what the tool that lenders use to price those fixed rate products. And you find that, we've had many a question from landlords about, should I be doing a discounted product at the moment or a fixed rate? Well, the pricing at the moment for discounted products, where you come off the bank base rate, you're talking, it's only about 0.5%. Well, it's 0.5% more expensive than the equivalent 2-year fixed rate product. And what you also find is most lenders, when they offer a discounted product, it's only really for 2 years. So my guidance in general terms, or our guidance to landlords, is if you're looking at short term, secure a 2-year deal. But as you're saying, John, if you're looking, start to look from about 6 months before the end of your product. Because it's important that you can secure rates and be ready to go. Not all lenders will allow you to secure something, but at the same time, start the research probably 6 months out.
And with regards to those discounted products that you're talking about there, and fixed products, if we are comparing 2 years to 5 years, what should we be looking at? So should we be looking at short term or more medium term? What's your hunch? What would you advise?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, John, because it depends on what the plan is that the landlord has for the property. If they're planning on staying in the market and staying and not needing to capital raise against the property, then realistically, you might be going at 5-year sort of products. We're seeing now we've got maybe 5 or 6 different lenders with 5-year products starting with a 3. You've got to be mindful that there's some hefty arrangement fees with some of them. But at the same time, when you speak with your broker, they will do, as we do a total to pay analysis over the 5-year. If it's a 5-year deal we're talking to the client about, we'll do a total to pay over the 5 years to take into account lower rates, higher fees, or, low fees, not so cheap interest rates. So we take those into consideration. But again, it depends on what the landlord's planning on doing. If they don't need to leverage and they're just thinking, well, I just want to sit tight, it might just be a product transfer. So that, lenders have become very competitive with their product transfer offerings. But again, it's worthwhile getting the advice, because when you get the advice from your broker, they will do an analysis and see what the savings are, comparing what your lender is prepared to offer you and what the market's prepared to offer you, and then see if there's any savings in there.
Duke, there's a lot there for us to unpack and go away and think about, as always. And that's what today's session is about, and conversation is focused on what should we as landlords be thinking about in the short term as well as the medium and long term there. If you were to give our listeners and our viewers one bit of advice today, Duke, what would that be?
You know what, John? I work on the phrase, do not pause. And when I say do not pause when you're coming towards the end of your product, because we're seeing little changes in the market. The unemployment figures going up. Last week, we saw a bit of an uplift in the swap rates. And then you shouldn't really pause. You need to start speaking and doing your research probably 6 months before the end of your product, just to make you sure you could try to secure something. And then when it comes to the product choice, think of a fixed rate as something like it's a bit of an insurance policy that you won't go above a certain rate, but try to secure it. But a lot of brokers now, what they do is when they secure a rate, we used to, go back to 22, we used to just secure a 5-year fix for a client, start with a 1 or an early 2 or something like that. And we wouldn't need to revisit it because the rates were not fluctuating. Now we do a lot of checks post-offer to check to see if the product is still the most competitive available for the landlord based on the market at that given time. So before you formally complete, we do a lot of analysis before, when it goes from formal offer through to completion. So main story is just please do not pause. Just don't think you're going to get something cheap, because one thing you can't afford to do is go on to standard variable rate, because then you'll start to lose the benefit. If you go on standard variable rate for 2 or 3 months, you start to lose the benefit of the products offerings that are available for you.
That's great. Well, Duke, thank you very much for your time on this session. I think there's a lot there, as I say, for us to take away and consider, and as you say, get ahead of the game and start thinking about it now in an ever-changing marketplace, which is great. Thank you very much, Duke. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, pleasure.
Well, very interesting stuff. Another great interview in our series of expert interviews here on the podcast. So, John, I'm curious. The subject matter there, as you said, was very dense, was very, very sort of complex, I think. And what I'm curious as to what Sal's role is there in helping get that information to members and to landlords.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, there's a lot of information we've been discussing there and hearing from Doug as an expert in the field in an ever-changing marketplace. You know, I think that's the key takeaway here. There's a couple of things he was saying there which resonates for me as a landlord. One is get ahead of the game, start thinking about it now. Don't pause, as he says. So always think about when your products, if you are on a fixed rate product, when that's due to come to an end, and you do not want to go into any kind of variable interest rates. So get ahead of the game, start looking at the market. Of course, take advice, that's really important. 3MC provide this service for us as SAL through SAL Mortgages, which is open there to SAL members. So please get in touch if you want them to give any advice to you. But equally as well, of course, you could be going to your own independent mortgage advisor. But importantly, somebody who knows the market and is aware of the wide variety of products that are available there. And I think another thing he said, which was good to take away, is really have a good discussion with your mortgage advisor about your longer term plans. You know, what is it you're planning to do with this property or your portfolio? So maybe rather than just thinking 2-year fixed products, should you now be starting to think at the slightly more medium term products there? What are your plans for that portfolio? And that might actually sway you in the direction of perhaps a 5-year product, as Doug was saying, as opposed to a 2-year product. So I think really the good thing is it's a buyer's market. So there's lots of products there, many more coming on stream as well too, which is great. But equally, shop around as is always the case. So I think it's very positive news for us in the sector. And as what Doug was reflecting is, of course, yields are quite good here in Scotland. And we were hearing that a couple of episodes ago from Zoopla as well. So it's saying that Scotland is a good place to invest. So despite all the doom and gloom that we hear and we talk about when it comes to changes in legislation and landlords leaving the sector, which we know is happening, but nevertheless the mortgage market seems to be pretty buoyant. So from a financial perspective, there's good opportunities out there for us. So.
And that was certainly the feeling that I got when I was listening to you and Doug having that conversation, is there is reason to be optimistic. There's reason to have a bit of cheer with the way the market is and the way it's going. I'm wondering what SAL members and SAL itself can do to kind of help that along, in terms of get that message across and get the idea that there is a reason to be optimistic, as you say, given the slightly negative tone that we sometimes hear from the media and from other sources. So what is it that, I'd put you on the spot as a sales chief exec, but what can Sal do to get that, to help that message across?
Well, I do think we need to talk positively about the private renter sector, despite everything that's going on. That it's a good investment opportunity. We're always going to have people who need a home to live in the private rented sector. So we need people to provide those homes. So the question for us as investors is this a good investment opportunity for us, for you in particular? And again, that answer would be different for me as it would be for you as a private landlord. So we need to really look at what are our long-term intentions and our short-term gains that we're looking to get from this investment and the opportunities that are out there. So for us as SAL, it's very much about guiding our members. We do work closely, as I say, with 3MC. We have regular online meetings where we're able to discuss these subjects, and more importantly, landlords can share their experience. We are an organisation there that gives voice to private landlords and letting agents, so it's good to come on board and say, well, this is what I'm finding, this is my experience, this is where I'm going for guidance and support, and we as SAL can certainly share that and hopefully in an upbeat way. But as with everything when it comes to any kind of mortgage finance, it's about knowing where to go when and where the opportunities are. And certainly because we've got the links with Doug at 3MC and others, we're able to put that before our members and say, here's a deal for you to consider, or here are your options. How does that fit where you are as a property investor at the moment?
And I'm sure that if SAL members or currently unaffiliated landlords were looking for more information from 3MC and from Doug, and they can contact Sal and get
Of course.
that way.
And I think the important takeaway is take independent mortgage advice wherever you possibly can.
Well, thanks, John. And with that, another episode of Landlord Voice comes to an end. If you've enjoyed this episode or have enjoyed any of our previous episodes, which are all still available wherever you get your podcasts, please do consider liking, sharing, subscribing, interacting with the podcast in any way that you'd like to. It really helps us out. It takes a lot of effort to put these things together, so getting any sort of feedback is wonderful. So just remains to be said that for me, Alan Grant, for John Blackwood, we'll see you next time.
Bye for now.
Landlord Voice is a podcast by the Scottish Association of Landlords, produced in partnership with Alan Grant Communications and Mallard Productions. All footage and music was used with permission. Questions, comments, suggestions, or other feedback should be sent to alan@alangrantcommunications.com.